If you've ever learned English before, which you probably have if you're understanding me right now, you likely know the basic rules of how we speak. It's a pear and an apple, not unpear and a apple. You probably also know that the letter R after a letter T or D makes a tr or dr sound respectively. Or you know the rule that the letter S between two vowels often turns into a Z sound. But today, I'm going to talk about some pronunciation rules in English that we use every day that you're probably unaware of. First rule of pronunciation that you're likely unaware of when you speak is the aspiration of consonants. Aspiration is essentially how breathy or airy you're making your consonants when you speak. For example, take the word tick and the word stick. Notice how in tick, the T is much more airy and powerful compared to the T in stick? That's because the T in tick is aspirated, while the T in stick is not. There's actually a whole rule about this. Stops, which is the fancy name for consonants like P, T, and K, are aspirated in the beginning of a stressed syllable. Take, for example, hotel. The stress is on the second syllable, so the T becomes aspirated. However, stops become unaspirated in that same syllable if the stop has an S before it. Listen to the T in pastel. Even though hotel and pastel have the stress on the last syllable and start with a T, since there's an S before the T in pastel, the T becomes unaspirated. Going back to tick and stick, this rule is why the T sounds different. In this circumstance, the letter T is considered an allophone because it is the same letter pronounced in different ways. In English writing, there is no written way to know if a letter is aspirated or not. But in reality, it's not super important if you aspirate your consonants or not. In some languages, however, like Mandarin, the aspirated t and the unaspirated t are considered their own standalone sounds, and both can be used at any time. For example, in the Mandarin words
套
and
道
but they are both different words with different pronunciations. In English, aspiration is not a factor to make different words. If you pronounce top without aspirating the T, top, no one will really bat an eye, but in Mandarin, you're saying a completely different word. Though you probably want to aspirate if you wish to sound more like a native speaker. Now, there are more rules with stops. If a stop is at the end of a word, they can have what is called a no audible release. For example, in the word lip, the P becomes almost silent in a way. This can happen with any voiced or voiceless stop. Neck, pig, tub. You place your tongue as if you're going to actually make the sound, but you don't release anything. Of course, if the word after this stop starts with a vowel, the stop has an audible release. Take my lip is red, for example. The P has an audible release. This rule applies to almost all stops except for the letter T. At the end of a word, the letter T can become a glottal stop, or the sound found between uh-oh. For example, the letter T in lit just becomes a different sound rather than having no audible release. But when the word ends in a consonant cluster like NT or ST, the letter T can still become a glottal stop just like in lint, or have no audible release like in best. T is weird because if the next word after lit begins with a vowel such as in lit up, it can be pronounced with a glottal stop lit up, with a flap lit up, or with an aspirated T lit up. It really just depends on your dialect. Now moving away from stops, the next rule is a rather simple one. The word the actually has two different pronunciations, and there's no written way of knowing that this is even a rule, as is the case with a lot of these rules. The word the is pronounced as the when preceding a vowel. For example, the apple is usually pronounced the apple. This is actually what is called the strong form of the word the, but I'll get into strong and weak forms later. But this doesn't happen to all vowels. Like if a word begins with the E sound, you typically want to pronounce the as the, like in the email. The is usually always pronounced the when preceding a consonant. However, people can also use the in any circumstance when they want to place emphasis that what they are talking about is the one thing that everyone knows about and not just anything. If someone asks you, did you go to a store? You might respond, no, I went to the store. On to the next rule, and staying on the topic of the TH sound, I feel many don't know there's actually two sounds represented by the digraph TH. By the way, this sound represented by TH is called a dental fricative. There's a voiced dental fricative and a voiceless dental fricative. This is the same difference in the consonants S and Z. For example, the dental fricative in the word thing compared to in the word them is that in the word thing, the dental fricative is voiceless and them is voiced. It's a subtle difference that only shows up in speech, which is weird because English usually does a good job at differentiating voiced and voiceless consonants in writing, such as in V and F, P and B, J and CH, etc. If only we had thorn and eth back into English. This next rule is focused on vowels. Listen to the word back versus the word bag. Notice the difference? The A sound in back is much shorter than the A sound in bag. This is because there's a rule in English that vowels are shorter when the consonant following it is voiceless. More examples are batch versus badge, mace versus maze, or late versus laid. This is another subtle rule in English. Moving on to the next rule, this is about weak versus strong form of words. When a word is weak, it is usually unstressed and said in a shorter length compared to their strong counterpart, which is usually stressed and is spoken longer. Take the sentences, "What is that for?" versus "This is for that." Notice how in the first sentence, for is said with a long O compared to the second sentence where it's pronounced as fur. In the first sentence, the strong form of for was used, and in the second sentence, the weak form was used. Using a strong form usually places emphasis. So by asking, "What is it for?" I'm placing emphasis on for because I want to know the specific reason why that thing is being used. This is not the only reason that strong forms are used. Weak forms of words usually have their vowel reduced to schwa, or the sound, but they can also be contracted if they are an auxiliary verb such as will, would, or did. She will becomes she'll, she would becomes she'd, and so on and so forth. Weak and strong forms can be used for so many different words. More examples include the word can and he can do anything versus can he do anything? Or the word where and where is he going versus he's going where the wind takes him. A lot more types of words can have weak or strong words depending on different reasons. I'm not going to go too in-depth into each difference and the reasoning in this video, but just know that this is a thing and that you might be unaware of it. On to the final rule for this video. We all know the beloved ed suffix for past tense of regular verbs. It's quite simple. If a regular verb is in past tense, just smack an ed, say id after the verb and you're good. But did you know there's 3 different ways of pronouncing this ed ending? The first way is the fan favorite. It's just saying id, just like it's spelled. This pronunciation usually occurs with verbs that end in t or d. Rated, hated, slated are some examples. The second way to pronounce ed is like a t. This happens when a verb ends in a voiceless consonant such as in laughed, mapped, or passed. The final way is just pronouncing ed like a d. You see this in verbs that end in voice consonants, vowels, liquid consonants like L or R, or nasal consonants N or M. Examples include bagged, dazed, played, died, mailed, roared, tanned, or zoomed. It's quite interesting to think that these different ways to pronounce ed could be spelled differently but aren't. If they were written differently, people would be saying that English has 3 different past tenses for regular verbs, but no one says that, even though it's technically true. Everyone says that regular verbs just take the ed ending and that's it. This is interesting because people say that English has 2 different indefinite articles, a and un, because of a pronunciation change of the same word. Yet people don't say that there are 3 different suffixes for the regular past tense, even though this follows the same logic. The same logic also applies to the versus the. They have a different pronunciation just like a versus un, but the didn't get a spelling change for some reason, and thus everyone says English just has 1 definite article and 2 indefinite articles, even though there should be 2 definite articles by following the same logic. But I guess this just happens due to the nature of the English language. And that's all for this video. There are many more pronunciation rules of English that are rather obscure or not really explicitly taught that I didn't mention. And of course, as is the way of the English language, the rules mentioned in the video can have weird exceptions, rules within themselves, or these rules just might not apply to you because of your accent. But it is just fascinating to know what we do in our speech subconsciously. At least for me, I was never explicitly taught any of these rules in school. Before I end the video, let me end it off with some questions. Were you aware or explicitly taught some or all of the rules mentioned? Any other rules or exceptions I should have talked about? Have any ideas for future videos? Also, if there are any errors in my information, please let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.